as we're moving forward. Um, so I actually finished ahead of time, which is good because we're going to be able to spend more time um, talking in the small groups. And so I'm going to have Sydney. We prepared some questions for Sydney. So I'm going to put the questions up on the screen. I mean, this photograph is literally the photograph that we want to see for all of you. Our program only works for my wife and I if you have great outcomes. Otherwise, it's been a 2-year waste of time. So if Sydney would have received a rejection letter from the University of Chicago, then she would have gone to her number 2 school, Elon, where she was already offered admission. But if she would have received a rejection letter, then she would have gone to her number 3 school, which I believe was Bates College. And then if she would have received another rejection letter, she would have gone to the next school, which was Northeastern, nominated for the Torch Scholarship Program. And then if we got all the way to the end of senior year, and Sydney, instead of being a guest speaker today to talk about how wonderful the program has been for her, she would have been a speaker that we would dare not invite, because she would come on and say, Mr. and Mrs. Wynn don't know what the heck they're doing. I got turned down everywhere that I applied to. So that's not where we want to be. We want to be in a place where we have this type of photograph of each of you having been offered admission to your top college. So with that, Sydney, we're going to unmute your mic. We can go ahead and show your video as well. And we want you to respond to this first question, which is why you believe Mr. and Mrs. Wynn were more helpful with assisting with your essays than your teachers.
Okay. Well, I feel like this is not a difficult question, but I'm trying to put this in a way that is respectful.
That's okay. No one's gonna know but the people who are on the call. So just tell it like it is, Sydney.
Of course, as always. Well, okay, so I loved my teachers. They were awesome. I had really great teachers. However, everyone, when you get to senior year and you start, drafting your essays, or rushing to draft your essays, I should say, which I'll clarify in a second, but when you start writing your essays, every person is going to ask your English teacher or your favorite teacher or the teacher who wrote you letters of recs to read the essays and then edit them for you. Everyone's going to do that. So the issue with that is that on top of, like, for instance, the majority of teachers ask, like, my English teacher. So on top of all of the essays that we submit to our English teacher, because we still have, like, class, then they have to take time out of their day to read these other essays, which a lot of them are happy to do. However, they just can't give you their full attention because they have so many other things to do. Like, being a high school English teacher for seniors is a disaster. So they just cannot give you the time and the effort that it really takes to truly break down your essays. Because when it comes to your essays, for me, a lot of you guys know a little bit about me, as of, like, my test scores and things like that. So applying to the University of Chicago was really daunting, but I knew that I had the story, and I knew that I had the extracurriculars and things like that to get me into the school. But the only way that they were going to know that is through my resume, which I spent a lot of time doing, building up the resume. So it is so important. And my essays. So when it comes to focusing on your essays, they are, in my opinion, for me, the most crucial part of your application, I think, or at least for the University of Chicago, because there were 3 of them that I needed. So they really wanted to know. And I don't know, like, how long you guys have been in the program, but I was in it for about a year and a half. Yeah, for about a year and a half. So by that point, and by the summer of my senior year, when I started drafting this essays, like, Mr. and Mrs. Wynn knew me quite well by then and knew what my strengths were and what my weaknesses were and what part of my story was important and what needed to be shared. Whereas your teachers only know you in an academic setting. But for me, I was better in a more social kind of setting, things like this, talking, that's where my strengths are. Also in the academics, but it's just different. So when you are working with people who know you as a person, it really changes the game. And that is what makes your essay so crucial. So like I drafted my essays so many times before I got it. Like my Common App essay, I wrote the whole thing, and then Mr. Wynn looked at it and he was like, no, this ain't it. It's good, but this is not what you need to tell people. And I didn't know that. And I know that if I brought this, excuse me, if I brought this beautiful story to my teachers, my English teacher would have been like, wow, this is really moving. This is really creative. I like it. Whereas Mr. Wynn was like, this is a good story, but this is not the information that colleges need to know about you, which I know is another question that's coming up. So I'm not going to spill all of the beans right now. But essentially, what I'm trying to say is when you're working with your essays, you need to know what needs to be in there. And from a person who has lived all of it, it's just so much information that I don't even know what's important. And that's where Mr. and Mrs. Wynn really, really help. Just like putting the information that needs to be in there in a way that it answers the prompt and in a way that tells the college as much information about you that is possible, that's going to like win them over. And my teachers just couldn't do that, one, because of time, and two, because they really didn't know me like from me. So
Very good. Okay, so question number 2. Did any of your teachers ever mention the concept of non-cognitive variables as components that college admission officers look for in your essays?
no, not at all. This is why I would say that the program is the most beneficial, is because it highlights all of the things that I didn't know, and that just wasn't in, like, didn't tell me about it. Like my teachers and my guidance counselors, they just did their job, but when it came to like actually applying to college, which is like the whole point, well, for me it was the whole point. I'm not going to say it's the whole point because everyone has their own path, but for me, my goal was to get through high school to go to college. That's what I needed to do. That's what I wanted to do. And your teachers don't really tell you how to get there. And when it comes to the important information, which I mentioned a little bit like 2 seconds ago, about this non-cognitive variables, because for me, as you guys saw, my strengths were not in my test scores. My class rank, I was like 73 or 78 out of my class, which is not bad, but definitely, for me, not where it is when you're trying to apply to a school that's so selective. And then my test scores were a 26 super score. So it's like things like that, you know, weren't who I am, you know? So when it comes to, what is important for colleges to know, they needed to know that I, have a lot of leadership skills, which was in my resume and in my essays, that I'm, really active leader in my community. I do a lot of community service. I have had to deal with a lot of difficult things in my life that a lot of people generally don't have to deal with. So it has made me, have to grow up very, very quickly, and has put my maturity level on a different scale than my peers. And these are some of the things that colleges wouldn't know if you just write a very academic or scholarly essay. You don't have who you are and what makes you you in these essays. So, for me, when I applied to college, I did not bank on my scholastics as much. Like, obviously, they can see from my transcript that I did do the IB program, and the coursework was a lot and it was really heavy. But I also am more than just my grades, and I'm more than just my piece of paper. And these are the things that I think a lot of people forget. And that's what I think hinders certain applicants from applying, is just they don't highlight the things that make them unique. And most of the time, in my opinion, it's not, how well you did on this test, or, what like your class rank is, or things like that. So when it comes to things that are more like emotional maturity and things like that are not, I would say quantifiable, such as like a test score or something like that, those are something that, you know, is unique in essays because they're not there very often. So I think that when a college admission officer reads that or can see that in your essays, it really puts you at a different playing field and puts you in this other category of, oh, this person is really, you know, paying attention to what we want and is really trying to show us, you know, who they are and why they are important and why should we accept them. Because at the end of the day, your goal when you're applying is to tell people why you are important. So that's just like what you need to do. And with the information that I was given, and I think with the information that a lot of people are given from their schools, that doesn't really come across so much because there's this stigma of like, you can only get into big colleges if you have the perfect test scores and if you have, you know, the best grades and things like that. But at the end of the day, as you can see from me, you know, that's not always the case. You know, there are so many other factors. So those things are so crucial to get into your essays. So
So
anyway, yeah.
let me make this point for everyone to tie this month and next month together so that you're clear on, so that everyone is clear on where we're going. If you don't do an honest assessment this month, then it's going to hinder us when we work on the My Story essay next month. You have to do an honest assessment so that your My Story essay tells the story that needs to explain the assessment. So let me simplify that a little more. When and again, I'll use Sydney as an example. When Sydney in her essay tells her story, then her academic achievement becomes even more profound than what it looks like on paper. So whereas when Sydney, not being a straight A student, when she tells her story, the fact that she's in the IB program and doing well in it elevates her to a much higher level in the eyes of admission officers that they would not know if they did not know her story. And so it's important for all of you to be transparent with my wife and I, because if we really don't know your story, we can't help you structure your essays. And if you are guarded and protective of your story, then you are not going to create the type of essays that we need to get you into some of the schools and some of the college scholarships that we're going to want you to apply for, to apply to. And then the final point that I'll make before I go on to the next question with Sydney is that if you haven't even finished your college list, then what Sydney just said doesn't apply to you. When she says, well, you need to write your essay that speaks specifically to the college and to their mission and to what they're looking for. If you haven't finalized your college list, then we don't even know what the mission is or what they're looking for. And then we can just waste so much time going back and forth on essays that are not even relevant to the group of colleges because you have not finalized your college list. So our next question for Sydney is, why is an honest assessment of your body of work so important to choosing your admission cycle and focusing on every detail of your college application?
Okay. Well, I feel like it's not even that it is so important. It's just that it's essential. Like it has to be done because it just, to me, it like, okay, let me take a step back. I applied early decision to the University of Chicago because I knew that where I was at that time, no matter what, like I knew that I was going to apply early decision in January of that year. And if you don't, that's okay. Just, you know, work for it, get it going a little bit. But when I knew that, then I can realize, you know, this is what I need to do and now I need to like crack down. But I only knew that I needed to apply early decision because I knew where I was in comparison to where I needed to be and what my body of work was. So for instance, you know, when we were talking about in the beginning, for those of you who were here like really early on, we were talking about how, you know, some people are into music, some people are into, you know, athletics, some people are into community service, things like that. So you need to figure out what I think is your thing, for instance. And you can have many things, and you know, there are a lot of people that even that I saw when I was working with that they believe that they didn't have a thing that they were good at or something that they focused on. But in my opinion, everyone has something, whether it's like art or, you know, stand-up comedy or, you know, writing or something. No matter what it is, everyone has something. So once you figure out what that something is or what those somethings are, you can target your application to highlight those things, which makes a big difference, and it'll help you, you know, with your admission cycle. So I can confidently say that if I applied regular decision, there is no way I would have gotten in. One, because the applicant pool is super, super big. It is so much bigger in the regular decision, like tens of thousands of applicants bigger. It is so much larger. However, I would stress that I wouldn't apply early decision to a school that you are not 100% on because it is binding. So I knew that I had to apply early decision because I also think that depending on the school, so University of Chicago is technically a liberal arts school. They go by a very holistic application and they have a lot of like elements to their, you know, school or academics, I should say. And from my experience researching and doing a lot of like studying on these different schools, I would say that a liberal arts school is a lot more well-rounded and circled, where you can be, you know, better at, you know, like athletics than you are like at academics, and that's okay because they want a really diverse student body. So when you figure out that, you know that applying early is the way to go when you are not 100% academically strong and have all of these other things, I would say. I hope this is like coming off at the right way and not trying to sound too aggressive, but if you have an area of your application that is a little bit weaker than something else, definitely apply early, I would say. So I applied early to every single thing that I could. Obviously not early decision because that's only one school because it is binding, but I applied early decision to U Chicago, and then I applied early action to all of the other schools that I could or that were on my list, because one, it shows that like, hey, I understand that, you know, there's, you know, I'm unique, I should say, but I really want to go to your school. So can you look at the other things other than, you know, what I look like on paper and, you know, spend more time on my essays and things like that. Oh, and that's another thing that I want to point out is that what I learned by going through the summer program through the admissions process is that when you apply early, they spend more time on your application than they would if you applied regular decision, because there are less applicants. So, and you have less to compare to. I don't even know if this is relevant to the question anymore. This is just a tip that I would suggest, that, you know, it's really hard for a college to not compare you to other students, even if they say they look at you as a singular individual, because the University of Chicago does not have a set number of students that they don't have a quota, I should say. So they can accept as many as they want, even though it's always around 2,100 for their incoming class. They can accept as many as they want. So even though they say they don't compare students, they definitely do, because they have to, because they can't just accept everyone. So you want to be compared to the least amount of people as possible so that you stand out even more. And a good way to do that is by applying early, but you wouldn't know if you applied early. Like, you don't know if you should apply early if you don't have your college lists yet, if you don't know what colleges you want to apply to, and you don't know your body of work, and you don't know what is the best avenue to do that through. So basically what I'm trying to say is that you need to figure out what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what you're good at, what, you know, colleges need to see. And you need to figure out what Mr. Wynn said, what your colleges are. Please have a really good list, and then figure out, you know, what's the best time to do it. I would recommend, if you have one set school, apply early decision and then apply early action to everything you can, because you just have a smaller pool and you just have a much higher chance of getting accepted.
I think the wonderful thing about the way that you're responding to the questions before I go to question 4 is that you sound like such an expert in college admissions. And what that really speaks to is the work. When students in our program do the work, they separate themselves from their peers. They become smarter about this than almost everyone else in the high school, sometimes even the high school guidance counselors. And the students who try to rush through the activities because they know that we're going to have a meeting, and they just want to get as much done as possible before the meeting, are students who don't nearly benefit as much from the program, and students who don't recognize this. There's been a core thread in everything that you said in responding to the questions, and the core thread has been strategy. What is the strategy? Based on my body of work, what's my strategy? Based upon the colleges that I want to be admitted to, what's my strategy? Based upon my gifts and talents, what's my strategy? And for some students, athletes, I'm sure, are pretty familiar with that whole concept. I know that Jada today, at her track and field competition, each race that she runs, she's thinking about a strategy. How fast do I come out of the blocks? How much energy do I expend during the first 50 meters, 100 meters? And what we need for all of our students to begin to do is to embrace that part of our program rather than going through it as mindless zombies, just doing the work, not understanding why, then asking me questions about with answers that they should already know if they had done the work. They should be where Sydney is now. You should come through our program as an expert. And you should be able to tell the students who are coming behind you why you are where you are and how you got to where you are. So within that context, for Sydney, the question is, while you were admitted to the University of Chicago, how did Elon, Bates, and Northeastern figure into your backup plan?
Yeah, so before I actually tackle the question, I would like to just comment on something that is just so funny to me, because I remember starting this program and how little information I had or I knew about this process and, you know, the college process, I should say. And now looking back on it, and Mr. Wynn saying that I'm an expert, I just think that's so funny because I knew nothing. I didn't know anything about the college process. So wow, yeah, definitely. I do feel like pretty confident in what I'm saying just because I experienced it. And I went and I took classes on the college process, you know, during my summer program. So I do feel relatively confident to talk about it. I just think it's so funny because I knew nothing when I started. So yeah, that's definitely a plus. Anyway, getting back to the question. So yes, strategy is the most important thing. It is how I, you know, am here, you know, and how I wasn't really, I don't want to say that I wasn't worried, but the college process is like a gamble, I would like to say. Now, everyone relax. There's definitely a strategy, and it's not like all luck, okay? But to an extent, there is a lot of just doing as much as you can do and just hoping and praying for the best. And obviously, that's all you can do. Because just because you're qualified, just because you mark every box, doesn't mean, you know, you're guaranteed a spot, because that's just not how it works. So even though I had a really good, I wouldn't even say a good chance of getting into University of Chicago, because the numbers are the numbers and they didn't really look like they were in my favor. However, I checked all the boxes that I could check, if that makes sense. So I did all of my studying and things like that beforehand. So I knew the process. I knew where I fit into their statistics, I would say. I knew that I would be in a different group than a lot of applicants because I was first generation, because I come from a low income like family, because I have like all these other things. It was different, but it was definitely a gamble, I would say. Still, it was, you know, anything is possible, but I knew that I did everything that I could. However, because you know, honestly, I was gonna say because I didn't match from it, but even if you still match, you should still have backup plans, because I have some friends that 100%, like I have this one friend that qualified and she wanted to go to Columbia and she had everything. She had the test score, she had everything that Columbia wanted, and she still didn't get in. Granted, she's still going to UCLA, which is awesome, but you never really know. Even if you think that you're qualified, you never know what's gonna happen. So with that being said, I had you know, as it says, Elon, Bates, and Northeastern all as good backup plans. And a backup plan has to be realistic. It has to be okay. You know, University of Chicago is definitely a reach school for me. Even if I was qualified and things like that, it's definitely a reach because of the numbers. Whereas Elon, Bates, and even Northeastern is really, really hard. But I qualified for a specific scholarship, which I'll talk about. But that's what it was. So I would say for a backup plan, it has to be more attainable schools. Otherwise, it's not really an accurate backup plan. Like Harvard cannot be a backup plan. I'm sorry. Yale cannot be a backup plan. That's not the objective. So for me, these schools, I fit into a better bracket or a more accurate bracket. Whereas like Elon, the average test scores, I'm not really sure, but I think they're within like the mid 20s or mid to high 20 range for their average test scores, maybe the low 30s, I don't know, but I know that it was definitely more attainable for me. So with that being said, they also have like the Odyssey Scholars, which U Chicago also has, but it's different, but same name, confusing. Anyway, they also have like the Odyssey Scholars program, which is low income, and I also believe they have first generation. So I would be able to apply for those. So as a backup plan, if I didn't get into University of Chicago, Elon, I had all the same like extracurriculars that I did to apply for University of Chicago, except for this one, I fit into their test score bracket, and I knew that I would be able to apply for the institutional scholarships if I got accepted, because I just had a much higher chance of getting in, which I applied early action to Elon, so I did end up getting in. But it's one of those things where it's like your backup plans, you have to have a good strategy, number one, and it has to be attainable, but it also has to be financially accessible. So it's like for me, living in Florida, there's the University of Florida and Florida State University, which are the two biggest schools in Florida. One, the University of Florida is a lottery, so I don't really suggest a lottery school as a backup plan because that's just luck. So that doesn't really work. But FSU, I definitely hit the test score range and I hit the extracurriculars. However, I did not hit that financial burden, I should say, that it would cause for me to apply to that school. So that really couldn't be a backup plan either, because if I get in and then I can't afford it, what's the point of that? You know, that's not a good backup plan. Whereas Elon, if I got in, which I had a much higher chance of getting into that, I had a good like institutional scholarships that I'd be able to apply for, and I would almost I would say that I would have gotten a full scholarship, but I can't really say that because I didn't apply. But with all their scholarships, I probably would have. Bates is the same thing. Bates is test optional, if you guys didn't know that, which hopefully you did because the modules test optional schools. But Bates, just like the University of Chicago, is also test optional. So that's one of those things where it's like I wouldn't have to worry about that. Therefore, if I didn't submit my test scores, it puts me into a higher bracket as well because the test scores were the lower part of my application. They have really great scholarships because it's a liberal arts school, and I'm sure you guys should know by now that liberal arts schools generally have better scholarships. I should say generally, but they do. They just give more out. They're more financially generous from my research. So there, I didn't have to worry about my test scores. I kind of fit within the test score bracket if I did apply, but whatever. I had the extracurriculars and I had everything else, and they would provide me a lot of institutional scholarships, need-based and merit-based, so I wouldn't have to worry about that. So that's why Bates is a good backup plan. And then Northeastern I also had as well. They have the Torch Scholars, which I was a good candidate for. So I would have that. So if I did apply, which was a little bit harder because their test scores were, that's the whole thing. It's like you have to figure out, the give and the take within every school and what you can, work with. So like the University of Chicago and Northeastern were both kind of like the academics are very, very high. So even though I have everything else, or relatively, the academics put me on the border as, or on the bubble, as Mr. Wynn likes to put it, where it's like anything can happen.
Let me jump in and explain Northeastern for everyone. And you're right, Northeastern, the average test scores are almost exactly the same as the University of Chicago, up in the mid to high 30s. But Northeastern had a Torch Scholars program that allows students who are first gen, like you, to be nominated for, which we were planning to. Yeah. And then they would invite 50 students from those who were nominated to fly to Boston to interview. And the point that we made about you, and this goes back to each student's body of work, and I think the students have recognized it as how you have responded to the questions, is that we felt that you would be one of the best students to be interviewed at the Northeastern interview weekend, and that you would come away with that scholarship easily. Um, which, again, goes to each student's strategy, because we have some students in the cohort who we would say, no, you don't need to apply to Northeastern, because if you went up to interview, no matter how much we try to prepare you, you would just be a disaster. Whereas there are other students who have personalities that would just be ideal to be interviewed. And I think that as every student reflects on their body of work, there are some students that we have worked with that we say, look, we're going to apply to schools and for scholarships that do not require interviews. And then there are other students who we say, we're going to apply to schools and scholarships that require interviews, because we know that you're just going to kill the interview. So that's where you would have been with Northeastern. But I guess the issue of the backup plans is really something, because when you have a perfect plan, you just go 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. But in your situation, since 1 worked, you didn't need to go to 2 to 3 to 4.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But I didn't know that, so I had to prepare for everything. But yeah, so hopefully I'm not interrupting, but I definitely want to add on to that a little bit, of how important having a really good college list is, because, I had, I think, 13 to 15 schools on my list, but since I applied to almost all of them early, and since I applied to University of Chicago early decision, I applied to about 8 schools, like, early, so November, and November, I don't know. They were just very, very early. By the time regular decision came around in January, I already knew. I applied to University of Chicago November 1st, and I found out on December 18th. So by then, I already knew that I got in, and that, well, I kind of had to go, but it's not like it was a hard decision if I got in. But it's one of those things where it's like, if you have a really good college list, the backup plans are there. But, if you have the strategy, if you have a good college list, I don't want to say that you wouldn't need them, but for me, I didn't need them. But it's because, even by the time I found out from the University of Chicago, which was my last school that I got into, I had already gotten into all of my other schools that I applied to. A lot of them were state schools. They weren't like, but I'm not saying that state schools are bad. I'm just saying that they were just easy applications through the Common App. So it was fast, but I already had so many other schools that I didn't even need to worry about applying to more schools in January and even into February, because I had already, I had Elon and I had University of Chicago, which were the 2 best options for me. And they were my top 2 choices, just based off of everything as a whole. So even by then, I already had the schools that I wanted to apply to. So even the backup plans that I had, I didn't really need to use them because of my college list. And it was just the best one for me and the most beneficial. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Sydney. I think that you've answered, at least you've provided the context for us to move into our rooms. Because what we want to do is, as each student reflects on the June activities in terms of their self-assessment, we want you now to have these conversations about your resume, your email signature, and your branding. And we need you to participate and to ask questions.